I want to tell you about the moment FIFA's corruption became impossible to ignore. May 27, 2015, a hotel in Zurich. FIFA's annual congress is about to begin. The event where Sepp Blatter, FIFA's president for 17 years, is about to be re-elected for a fifth term. At dawn, Swiss police enter the hotel. 14 FIFA officials are arrested. Executive committee members, confederation presidents, marketing executives on charges including wire fraud, racketeering, and money laundering, filed by the US Department of Justice, FBI, and IRS criminal investigation. At the same moment, Swiss authorities raid FIFA's Zurich headquarters, seizing electronic data and documents. The US prosecutors had a line ready. This really is the World Cup of fraud, and today we're issuing FIFA a red card. 4 days after the arrests, Sepp Blatter became re-elected FIFA president with 133 votes. 4 days after that, under mounting pressure, he resigned. Within months, the chairman of FIFA's ethics committee and the chairman of its governance committee were both ousted after they tried to actually investigate. FIFA elected a new president, Gianni Infantino, on a platform of transparency and accountability. Within a year, Infantino had begun dismantling every meaningful check on his power. This is not a story about a few corrupt individuals. This is a story about a governance structure so perfectly designed for capture that corruption is not the exception, but it is the expected output. Today, we go one layer below the arrests, below the press conference, to understand what FIFA actually is, how it works, and why it keeps producing the same results no matter who sits in the president's chair. FIFA has 211 members associations. That is more members than the United Nations. This is not an accident. FIFA's voting structure gives one vote to every national football association, regardless of population, economic size, or football relevance. The Cayman Islands has one vote. Germany has one vote. The Cook Islands has one vote. Brazil has one vote. The result? The majority of FIFA's voting power sits with the 130-odd small associations of Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, the Pacific associations that are almost entirely dependent on FIFA's own development funding for its operational budgets. The president who controls that funding controls the votes. Sepp Blatter understood this in the 1970s when he began distributing development money to smaller associations in exchange for loyalty. FIFA's financial structure was built around this logic. The World Cup generates billions. A portion flows to development programs for smaller associations, and those associations vote to keep the arrangement in place. Blatter called this football for all. Investigative journalists called it organized crime. FIFA's legal structure amplifies this problem. It is registered as a non-profit association under Swiss law, which historically subjected it to almost no external oversight. It is not publicly traded, so there are no shareholder accountability mechanisms. It is not a government body, so it is not subject to freedom of information requests or parliamentary scrutiny. Its revenues are enormous, more than $7.5 billion from 2022 World Cup cycle. But its financial disclosures were, for most of its history, minimal. Between 2011 and 2014, FIFA paid only $75 million in taxes on revenues that ran to hundreds of millions annually. The US Department of Justice investigation worked only because the US prosecutors could assert jurisdiction over transactions that touched American financial system. Wire fraud occurring through US banks and US payment processors. Infantino's FIFA generated a projected $47.7 billion in US economic output from the 2026 tournament, while simultaneously operating as a non-profit association that is structurally answerable to nobody. The 211-member voting structure that Blatter built to entrench his power is the same structure Infantino now uses. The mechanism is identical, only the name on the door has changed. The World Cup bid process is presented as a meritocratic evaluation of technical competence, infrastructure, and hosting capability. It is not. The process by which a country wins the right to host the World Cup involves winning votes from FIFA's executive committee or council, a small group of officials whose votes the US Department of Justice concluded after a multi-year investigation were routinely bought and sold. Chuck Blazer, FIFA's long-serving CONCACAF General Secretary and a member of the executive committee that voted on World Cup hosting, turned FBI informant in 2013 and admitted he accepted bribes in exchange for his vote on the 2010 World Cup host selection. He was not an exception, he was just an example. The investigation into the 2018 and 2020 bids, which awarded hosting to Russia and Qatar respectively, produced the Garcia Report, a 350-page document commissioned by FIFA's own ethics committee, submitted in 2014, which detailed prima facie evidence of bidding rule violations. FIFA suppressed it. The chairman of the ethics committee released a brief summary that declared both bids untainted by bribery. Garcia resigned in protest. The full report was never officially released. What we know from subsequent leaks, US court documents and journalistic investigation, the Qatar bid involved payments that US authorities described as corrupt. The US Department of Justice ultimately convicted or secured guilty pleas from more than 20 FIFA officials across its investigations. The 2034 World Cup was awarded to Saudi Arabia, the only bidder, after FIFA changed its rules to prevent Australia from entering a competing bid. FIFA's own assessment rated Saudi Arabia medium human rights risk and described the bid as a very strong all-round proposition. No vote among FIFA's 211 member associations was held. The FIFA Council, 37 people, ratified it. The mechanism that produced Qatar 2022 produced Saudi Arabia 2034 without even requiring a contested vote. Gianni Infantino was elected FIFA president in February 2016 on the most explicit reform platform in FIFA's history. He promised term limits, transparency, accountability, a new FIFA. He had an extraordinary mandate. The 2015 scandal had damaged the institution so badly that genuine reform seemed both necessary and possible. The Congress that elected him also passed a comprehensive reform package separating political and management functions, establishing independent oversight committees and limiting presidential terms. Within months, the reforms began to be dismantled. In 2017, Infantino moved to oust the chairman of the Ethics Committee's investigatory and adjudicatory chambers, the two officials who had actually driven the accountability process that removed Blatter. Both men said the moves were politically motivated. Miguel Maduro, chair of the government's committee, was also pushed aside after resisting what he described as Infantino's interference. Maduro later described Infantino as a king supremo that makes deals with a few people, and those deals are then imposed across the pyramid of football. The reforms had become a paper tiger. Infantino also became a subject of a criminal investigation in Switzerland, centering on secret meetings he held with then Attorney General Michael Lauber, who was overseeing FIFA-related criminal proceedings. No official minutes were kept. Neither man could recall key details. The investigation was ultimately closed without charges in 2023. Whether or not any criminal threshold was crossed, the optics were precisely those of the institution that Infantino had promised to reform. A FIFA president with private access to the prosecutor investigating FIFA, leaving no paper trail. What Infantino built instead of a reform was a more sophisticated version of Blatter model, where Blatter distributed development money to smaller associations. Infantino dramatically increased that distribution. FIFA's forward program now channels hundreds of millions annually to member associations. The logic is identical. Money builds loyalty, loyalty builds votes, and votes protect the president. The 211-member voting structure that Blatter designed to be unaccountable to large football nations is the same structure Infantino now operates. The US Department of Justice asked whether it endorsed FIFA's current reform efforts, clarified last year that it has not endorsed the effectiveness of any FIFA's current reform efforts. In December 2025, Infantino presented Trump with the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize at a ceremony that no one observer described as FIFA's most overt political alignment with a single state's power in the modern era. 2 months later, the US and Israel struck Iran. Infantino's response insists that the world is welcome in America and the tournament will proceed. The FIFA president's job, as Blatter understood and as Infantino has confirmed, is to keep the money flowing and the powerful happy. Everything else is branding. Let me explain why FIFA cannot be reformed within structurally, not just culturally. The 211 member associations that vote in FIFA's Congress are not equal, but they vote as equals. The small associations of the Pacific, Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa associations that would not function without FIFA's development funding collectively outnumber the large European and South American associations that generate 80% of FIFA's revenue. The president, who controls the development money, controls the majority of the votes, and FIFA's statutes explicitly prohibit government interference in national football associations. Any association that allows its government to influence its FIFA affairs risks suspension. This clause, intended to protect football from political manipulation, also protects FIFA from any government-level accountability mechanism.
Yes, I asked for a review by FIFA.
The only external force that has successfully disciplined FIFA is the US Department of Justice, which asserted jurisdiction not through any football authority but through US financial law. It worked precisely because so many of FIFA's financial flows passed through American banks and payment systems. But the US is now the host of the 2026 World Cup and the 2031 Women's World Cup. The political incentives for continued aggressive prosecutions of FIFA's leadership have changed. The theoretically available alternative, the major football nations walking away, has never happened and shows no sign of happening. UEFA's 55 members generate enormous revenue from their own competitions and could, in principle, form a breakaway world championship. But the World Cup's global reach, its 5 billion viewers, its brand power, built over 94 years, is not replicable. Walking away from FIFA means walking away from the World Cup. No national football association has been willing to make that trade, regardless of how outraged their governments or fans may be. The result is a stable equilibrium that nobody designed and nobody can break. FIFA generates billions from the World Cup, distributes enough to small associations to maintain their loyalty, gives enough for its own operations and leadership, and periodically experiences a scandal severe enough to require a new president, who then replicates the model with their own name on the door. Now let me close with what FIFA actually is, stripped of all the slogans. FIFA is not a sports governing body. It's a revenue extraction and political legitimacy machine that uses football at its operating medium. The World Cup, the actual football, the actual competition, the actual beauty of the sport, is the product FIFA sells to generate the revenues that sustain its political structure. The game is real, but it is not what FIFA is for. What FIFA is for, what it has consistently delivered across 94 years, is soft power laundering for whoever can pay the most and can offer the most in return. Mussolini wanted global legitimacy for fascism. FIFA gave him a tournament. Argentina's junta wanted to whitewash a genocide. FIFA gave them a World Cup final. Qatar wanted to transform a tiny Gulf state into a global brand. FIFA gave them 6,500 workers' lives worth of construction and a $200 billion image project. Trump wanted to host the world's biggest sporting event while banning citizens of qualifying nations from entering the country. Infantino gave him a peace prize. In each case, FIFA's answer was identical. The tournament will proceed and FIFA is committed to human rights. Everyone is welcome. For the game, for the world. The people who understand this most clearly are the ones who use it most deliberately. The governments and leaders who seek out the World Cup precisely because FIFA's institutional blessing provides exactly the international legitimacy they cannot obtain through their own behavior. The World Cup is the most effective soft power instrument in the history of global sports, and FIFA is the institution that decides who gets to use it. Football deserves better. The billions of people who genuinely love this sport deserve an institution that serves the game better rather than governments and officials who have found ways to make profit from it. But the structural logic of FIFA's design points exactly in one direction. And that direction is not reform. FIFA is a political institution that happens to run football tournaments. Once you see the mechanism, every bid announcement, every peace prize, every "the world is welcome" statement becomes legible in a completely different way.